Perfect. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We're about to get started with the memorial service for Dori J. Maynard. If you would please come in and have a seat, save your last hugs. There'll be time afterward at the reception. If you are still looking for a seat, there are plenty of seats over on this side, so feel free to walk over. All right. And we shall begin. Because how do you really begin to say goodbye to someone like Dori? Dori Maynard was more than an activist. She was more than an icon. She was more than a mentor. She was a person that poured into the lives of the people who had the pleasure of knowing her. All of us here today, and those who are watching us online, have been touched by Dori's legacy in ways that I think we can't even fully comprehend yet. But we all know that we received a grave, grave loss in February, and that through our own commitments and our own work, Dori's life will continue on in each of us. The first way Dori's life will continue on is in typical Dori fashion. This memorial has a hashtag. It's going to be hashtag Dori Memorial, in honor of how I and so many other people in the blogosphere met Dori in the first place. She wanted teachers in social media and asked people like myself, Deanna Zant, Sabria Hirsi Ali, to kind of be her guides into this new space and this new world. And little did we know, Dori would end up teaching us so much more than we could ever teach her. When we lost Dori, we not only lost a tireless advocate for diversity, but we also lost kind of the best mentor you could ask for, the mentor of your dreams, the mentor that so many young journalists of color never get to experience and never get. Someone who would sponsor you, someone who would co-sign you, someone who put a lot of thought and dedication and time into understanding what were the needs of the news environment and how does she best prepare journalists of color to not only be competitive, but to thrive. I'm a proud graduate of the Maynard Media Academy. And at this moment, I'd like all the other graduates in the audience to rise. Dori's executive leadership program created an entire class of people who understand not only what it takes to be in journalism today, but what it takes to become an executive, what it takes to lead, what it takes to have courage, what it takes to understand yourself so you can better serve others. This is the legacy that we are here to celebrate today. And I'll turn it over to my friend Virgil Smith to continue.
Thank you, Tanya. Good evening, everyone. Today is a special day to honor someone who has been an inspiration to many of us. I, like many of you, knew Dori's father, Bob Maynard, and also her stepmother, Nancy Maynard. They were trailblazers. They were mentors for me for many years. And Dori was an inspiration because Dori was a giver. And what do I mean by that? She was a giver by giving you the opportunity to step up and do the right thing for diversity. In today's climate, we need more givers who will challenge and cover the stories that need to be told. So I'd like to share with you a short passage, but before I do, I'd like to recognize the Maynard Institute Board of Directors, if they would stand along with the chairman of the board, Mark Trahan. So if the board would stand and be recognized. We have a long list of speakers, and those of you who know Dori, you know that she was about getting to the point, brevity. So we encourage our speakers to honor Dori by staying within the 3 to 5 minutes that we have allocated for each speaker. We know that you all have rich remembrances to share, and so we ask that you honor that as much as possible. And so I want to read a short passage to you that I came across this weekend. And you may have heard this, or you may not have. But it's entitled, "A Death Has Occurred." A death has occurred and everything has changed. We're painfully aware that life can never be the same again, that yesterday is over, that relationships once rich have ended. But there is another way to look upon this truth. If life now went on the same without the presence of Dory, we could only conclude that the life we remember made no contribution, filled no space, meant nothing. The fact is, Dory left behind a place that cannot be filled. It is a high tribute to her life. Life can be the same after a trinket has been lost, but never after the loss of a treasure. And so with that, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Martin Reynolds from Bay Area News Group. If you'd come to the stage and make your comments.
Thank you, Virgil. Good afternoon, good evening to all. I was thinking a lot about what to say today, and I couldn't help but come back to the day that Dory passed, because it really exemplified how she lived. The morning of her passing, we had a call scheduled with a funder, and I hadn't yet heard from her, which was uncommon even in her ailing state. So I was able to catch up with her mother, Liz, who told me that she was having a lot of trouble breathing and that wasn't sure if she was going to be able to be on the call. So then spoke to her very dear friend, also Sally Lehrman, who was also by her side, and we tried to strategize about how can we get this call off of her docket. And those of you who know Dory know she's not having any of that. Here's a woman who was having difficulty breathing and yet still was making every effort to be on an important call. Ironically, it was actually a call about a project we were looking to table for a little while for obvious reasons, but Dory was very adamant about having what she called a graceful exit and being able to make sure that that door would be opened another time. So we strategized and said, we just decided, well, you're not going to be on the call. And I texted her and she sent back a note saying, well, I can just tell them that I have an upper respiratory infection and I can just sit on the line and not speak. And which again spoke to her desire, her unwillingness to yield. So I said, no, let me just handle the call. Handled the call, it went very well. I texted her afterward and said, everything is okay. She still took the time to send a kind note complimenting my work on the effort. And here she is in her state, still sending encouraging text messages. And then a few hours later, she was gone. When you think about a person like that, what they mean to our profession, something really cemented in me that day about her and about the work of the Institute, that it has to go on, that this woman was on her last hours of life and yet was still trying to push the work of the Institute forward, its incredible legacy. And that's something that has stayed with me ever since, and I am committed to seeing that through. Personally, Dory was one of my dearest friends, and death in many ways has been kind to me over the years, as ironic as that might sound, and that I've lost people, but I haven't lost someone who this close as a friend. You know, friends are the family you choose and who choose you. And I've lost my friend. And I'm not really sure how I'm doing with it, and I know that many out there feel the same. But I do know that I love her, and I love her family. And she will be missed and continues to be missed. And with that, I hope I can hold on to her memories and to the relationships forged through having the pleasure of being someone who's called a friend. Thank you.
At this this time, we'd like to ask the family members of Dori Maynard to please stand and be recognized. Continuing with the theme of family, the people who were so important in Dori's life, I'd like to invite David Maynard, Alex Maynard, and Liz Rosen to offer their brief remembrance.
Thank you everybody for coming. This would have meant so much to Dory, just seeing people here celebrating her. It just means so much that we sort of end here in DC where Dory, my mom, and my dad sort of started as a family. Sort of everything we formed as a family here, and I have great memories here of living on Wyoming Avenue and just being here with these people that lived and breathed newspaper and journalism, and really set about just trying to get as many people of color as possible to get into the business, and just really means a lot that people are here and celebrating. Thank you.
We would like to invite Evelyn Sue, who is the Interim Executive Director at the Maynard Institute, to share a few words.
Thank you. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge our committee who worked in planning this event: Sonia Ross, Richard Prince, Jean Fox Alston, and Dorothy Gilliam. Dori Maynard was my boss and my friend. I had the privilege of working with her for more than 10 years, joined at the hip, working many 12-hour days and weekends. We created the Media Academy for Managers and trained hundreds of new managers at programs that we ran at the Nieman Foundation at Harvard and at Northwestern University. Many of our program graduates are here tonight, and that is always the happiest sight. We retooled our editing program and trained journalists in digital skills at our multimedia editing program at the University of Nevada, Reno. We brought our Fault Lines diversity framework to workshops around the country. You will hear much more about all her good works. Tonight, I'd like to pay tribute to my friend, the one who introduced me to high-end vintage shopping and the importance of Triple Points Day at Saks. The only boss to whom I could say things like, if you want to buy that Michael Kors bag, you should buy it, but you need to buy it right now, or we're going to be late for our meeting at Gannett. This is the person who believed you should be doubly, triply prepared, rehearsing presentations over and over again, but who also thought that crystals and special oils discreetly placed in a meeting room wouldn't hurt either. This is my good friend who would give me a hard kick to the instep whenever she thought I was being too hard on one of my kids. This is the friend who thought that waiting 6 hours to eat food you brought onto a plane was safe. My friend who sadly never got to see how she would look with her braces off. Dory was deeply spiritual, and to her spirit, I say, I hope where you are there is sashimi, steak tartare, and roast chicken. I hope there is red wine. I hope there are limitless books. I hope that you know the endings of Mad Men, Homeland, and Downton Abbey. I hope that you've communed with the spirit of your dad and with Nancy. I hope you are with Charles. Thank you.
The next person to take the microphone will be Aaron Haynes-Wack, who will be reading comments from two people who sadly could not be here today. Aaron?
Hi. Obviously, I'm not, as LaToya mentioned, Gilbert or Sally. My name is Erin Haynes-Wack, and I also bring condolences on behalf of the National Association of Black Journalists, where I serve as Vice President of Print. And I just have to say that it is so encouraging to see so much of Dory's NABJ family among the people who are gathered here today, because she was such a cherished and beloved member and a mentor to so many young journalists, including me. And you guys know that she was a fixture, not just at our convention, but year-round within our organization, and that she's going to be dearly missed this summer, but her legacy just ripples so deeply throughout NABJ and throughout our industry. And we know that she was a champion of diversity because she championed each one of us. And so NABJ does join all of you in mourning this loss. And now I want to read to you a remembrance from Sally Lehrman. When I think of Dory, a ruby comes to mind. Deep red, elegant, full of life, force, and power. Dory's late husband, Charles Lewis, picked a ruby for their wedding ring. Jan Christensen Heller, a close friend of Dory's, owns the jewelry store where he bought it. She told me that the ruby symbolizes love and commitment. It was a beautiful ceremony in their living room, bride and groom both dressed in white. Our St. Bernard Daisy was the flower girl and wore a red bow on her head. The ruby, Jan said, also signifies prosperity. Dory, of course, made no secret that she favored prosperity. She loved the good things in life, like beautiful clothes, delicious food, and first-class travel. Always a diversity trainer, she used to tell my husband that he really needed to have more compassion for rich people. But that's not the sort of prosperity that Dory radiated. It was a prosperity of spirit. That spirit infused her work for inclusion and her dedication to it. It infused her openness to others and their point of view, the way she embraced difference. It infused her generosity to those she mentored. She reflected and highlighted each person's own talents and brilliance right back to them, no matter what stage in their career. Dory also had prosperity of vision. She believed that change was possible, as long as we did our parts. I remember the first time she showed me the house she planned to buy in West Oakland. We drove up to a crumbling pile of wood, obscured by a massive palm tree. As we sat out front, I thought about the responsibilities of a good friend. I think I mentioned that it was a nice-looking tree. Then I asked if she was sure that this was really such a good idea. Dory laughed good-naturedly. She suggested that I had no imagination. I guess Dory was right. Charles, an architect, cut the tree down and lifted up those sagging boards into a beautiful 3-story treasure. The blighted neighborhood transformed. Dory's home became a gathering place. It was a house of friendship, solace, and joy. Ruby's adorable, among the toughest of gemstones. Many of you saw Dory turn sickening moments of discrimination into opportunities to teach. Her professional strength is legendary. So is her clarity and ability to help think through a tough situation. But you may not know the depth of her resourcefulness. Dory was constantly on the move, and that sometimes put her in a jam. Once, she flew to New York City just in time to get to an elegant evening event, except that her luggage and her change of clothes had not arrived with her. Dory always stayed at the Harvard Club, and of course the staff loved her. They sprang into action. There was no time to run out and buy a dress, so they offered their own clothes. They checked storage closets. They dug into the lost and found. Dory said she stood in the hallway hurriedly trying on this skirt and that blouse, flats and high heels, a shawl, a jacket, and before she knew it, she was ready to go, resplendent in an elegant ensemble. Dory could handle anything with aplomb. We used to have holiday dinners at our house, gathering many friends together. One time, Dory surprised me by offering to prepare a goose, a 3-day job, she explained enthusiastically. I thought this a big step for someone who rarely cooked, but Dory would not be deterred. The road to our house winds and turns along a cliff. Dory hated driving it, but she arrived perhaps only 45 minutes late, carrying the goose tucked under a big foil wrap. She seemed a bit sheepish and quickly shoved the bird into our oven. It needed finishing at high heat, she explained. The goose was delicious. Dory waited several years to tell us the truth. On a sharp turn, that bird had landed on her car floor. It had rolled around among piles of newspapers and who knows what else for the rest of the journey. The finishing was meant to incinerate whatever might have stuck to it. No one got sick, Dory pointed out. Rubies also embody protectiveness. Many of you have felt Dory's loyalty and generosity, but you may not know just how rich her love could be. When our friend Charles Jackson, an editor at the Oakland Tribune, chose to end dialysis and go into hospice, Dory was there every day. When her husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor, Dory tried everything: pills, potion, energy work. She brought funny movies, hoping that laughter might ease his way. When Jan underwent chemotherapy, Dory was there. She drove Jan to treatments. She sat beside her in the oncologist's office, asking questions and taking notes. And finally, don't forget our gem Sparkle. I bet you'll know that sparkle in Dory's eyes, that impish smile that brought you along in a wonderful secret. Her secret, I think now, that sparkle, was a recognition of the imperfections of life, of mine, of yours, of her own. Dory would be furious if we stood here one after another and held her up as faultless. The most valuable rubies have imperfections. As light rays glide across the stone, those imperfections shine brightly. During her last few weeks of life, Dory said a couple of times that there was one thing she wished she had done differently. We waited for that profound revelation. She touched a gold necklace around her neck and her pearl earrings. Then she said, "I wish I'd worn my beautiful jewelry more often." It was one of her droll jokes, but it was true. And once again, Dory was right. Our lives are filled with precious things, and yet we often put them away somewhere safe. We set them aside for later. We each carry a precious facet of Dory within us. Maybe it's her passion for diversity. Perhaps it's her sparkle and wit, or even her love for cats and soap operas. But whatever it is, I hope that you will let your bit of her ruby continue to shine.
Another guest could not be here today, Gilbert Bailon of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and so his comments will be read by Evelyn Sue. Or not. You'll read them later. Okay. We're still waiting on Gilbert's comments, but moving along, let's continue the reading, right? And reading from Dori Maynard's work is Doris Trong of the Washington Post. Doris?
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. Just a moment. Okay. Dory's great gift was her compassion. We met in 2006 when I was accepted to the Maynard Media Academy. But it was our work together during my years as president of the Asian American Journalists Association that helped me gain a better appreciation for her very smart understanding of our complicated world. I can only hope to honor her legacy by continuing her crusade for greater media diversity. Now, I'd like to share her column from July 17, 2010, titled Nelson Mandela and the Gift of Hope. Somewhere in my house are several copies of South Africa's 1994 election ballot. When I bought them, I was seeking more than just a piece of history. I was buying hope, because they reminded me that the impossible can be possible if we stay true to our course. By now, Nelson Mandela's journey from prisoner to the presidency of South Africa, from mere mortal to moral icon, has been told so many times that it almost feels preordained. But during his prison days on Robben Island, Mandela and his fellow political prisoners had to fight for even the smallest convenience, such as the right to wear long pants, or to be given sunglasses to shield their eyes from the harsh light glaring off the rocks in the lime quarry they were forced to mine. He won some of those struggles, only to discover more battles to come. Or, as Mandela is quoted as saying, "After climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb." As we prepare to celebrate Mandela's 92nd birthday, I look at the hills in my life, and I realize that it is time for me to find those ballots. In my life's work, not nearly as dramatic as Mandela's, efforts to diversify the media are at a potential turning point. After years of incremental progress, we have reached a standstill. What was once a hot topic is barely on the radar screen. While the media become whiter, America becomes browner, and our citizens seem to be at loggerheads on a variety of issues. Without a media equipped to help us understand each other, the possibility of splintering across the fault lines is greater than ever. Of course, I am in no way trying to compare efforts to create a more inclusive media with Mandela's endeavor to reform a nation. However, I do think that lessons can be gleaned from the lives that can help those of us who live every day. My late father used to say that we could physically live only one life, although biographies allowed us to absorb lessons from many lives. I thought about that as I was reading what Mandela had to say about courage, which gave me insight into accomplishments. "I learned that courage," he said, "was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear." My guess is that Mandela would also remind us that the person who accomplishes goals is not necessarily the person to whom all things come easily, but the one who works through hard times. When I get home, I'm going to dig out that ballot and bring it to the office to remind me that if Mandela could overcome 27 years of hard labor and walk out of prison poised to change the world, surely the rest of us can stay true to our goals. That's not to say I don't anticipate days when I will look out the window at the leafy landscape street in front of my office and wonder whether we will ever see the media live up to their promises to portray all segments of our society fairly and accurately. On those days, I will look at my ballot and think about Mandela in his cell, a much harsher landscape, physically and politically. Then, I will go back to work. As we celebrate Mandela's birthday, I thank him for the gift of hope, a powerful motivator.
Our next remembrance is from Donald Graham of Graham Holdings Company.
Good evening. So I want to start by talking a little about Bob Maynard, because to the surprise of many of you, I believe in these newspaper family dynasties. I met Bob when I was the editor of the Harvard Crimson in 1966, and he and Harding Carter were the kings of the Nieman Fellow class. He was unmistakable and unforgettable. Before I came to the Washington Post 5 years later, Bob had come there soon after Ben Bradley became the editor as a towering reporter. But then Bob did what we are all celebrating in the furtherance of his work that was done by Nancy and by Dory. Bob started at Columbia University, along with Leroy Aarons, his colleague on the Post, the summer program for minority journalists in 1970 or 71. I arrived at the post as a reporter in 1971, and there were two colleagues the following year who were among the first two graduates of that program, Alice Bonner and Major Wells. I went to California in 1973 to work for John Dotson, who was then the LA bureau chief of Newsweek. That summer, John told me of an exceptional student in the summer program for minority journalists whose name was Milton Coleman. I got on the phone to Ben Bradley and suggested we might want to take a look at the guy. And after a time in Minneapolis, he came to Washington, where he became the first African-American metropolitan editor of the Post and then the deputy managing editor. The next to last speaker today will be the first African-American managing editor of the Washington Post, who is also a graduate of the Maynard program. What was called the summer program for minority journalists was Bob Maynard's program. His strength, his passion, his life breathed life into it. Nancy and then Dory changed it radically. They did, it had worked, but they felt it needed to change. I have to say that as somebody who was interested in the program, and thanks to Bob's, Dory's, and Nancy's efforts, an occasional funder, I needed to be convinced that change was necessary, but it was. And to our enormous benefit, the Washington Post, every year when I was still publisher, sent a participant to the management program as we continued to hire people from the reporters and editors programs. Dori Maynard made an overwhelming contribution to the diversity of the management of the news business. Yes, she criticized all of us in the management of newspapers, and she should have. She criticized herself, and she criticized all of you, especially her board members. But while she wanted to be the spur to everyone, this is the best training program in the history of the newspaper business, period. No. I will tell you what I told Dory and what I told generations of other people considering funding this program. No graduate school of journalism, no graduate school of business, no program anywhere contributed to the news industry what the Maynard programs did. Bob, Nancy, Dory, and every one of you who has taught at that institute, served on its board, and continues to run it today have done something absolutely magnificent, and I am so proud to have been associated with you and with her.
Our next remembrance will be from Marissa Porto of the Daily Press Media.
I was a little worried about whether my remarks would be appropriate, but I came at exactly the right time. I'm an immigrant's daughter. For my mother, English wasn't a first language. It wasn't a second language. It was a third language. I grew up in South Florida. On any given day in South Florida, you can meet a Michigan retiree, someone whose family member died in the Holocaust, any number of people from Central or South America, or someone who came on a boat from Haiti. It is a land of diversity. When I first got my editing job at a family-owned newspaper, I was surrounded by editors who were predominantly white and male. My second job as an editor, I was surrounded by editors at a newspaper chain, and they were predominantly white and male. It wasn't until my third job as a newspaper editor that I realized there were people who had similar experiences to my own. There were minorities, there were women, there were immigrants. It was a different experience for me. That was also the newspaper chain that was kind enough to connect me with the Maynard Institute. And I am a graduate of their program. The first thing that that program taught me is it gave me an education about business plans and product development and marketing my company and myself. These are not things you learn at journalism school. The second thing that it taught me was, it taught me that there are other people who, like me, were trying to become leaders in newsrooms, and they looked like me. I got a mentor, Glenn Proctor, who is still my mentor today, the former editor of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, a wonderful person. I have some lifelong friends, including Martin Reynolds, who's here today, who I call whenever I need to talk over something that is happening in my world, in the business. And I would say the thing about Dory that I will miss the most isn't just the fact that she could talk to you about anything, like Native American traditions or the scent of vanilla and how it has a healing power. The thing that I will miss most about Dory is that she was a fierce, passionate journalism lover who wanted stories to reflect the community and who wanted the community to be reflected in the leadership of the local news organization. This is a challenging time in journalism. We all know this. There are fewer women and minorities in our industry today. It is sometimes a struggle to be doing what we do. For those of us who remain in the industry, it is even more important to keep her mission and her vision alive. Last year, my company, the Daily Press Media Group, which is a part of the Chicago Tribune, we developed a leadership academy. It's a year-long program that began this year. And of the editorial employees who work in my departments, 6 are in this program. 2 are white men, 3 are women, and 3 are minorities. Someday, I hope the folks who graduate from that program will be the next generation of leaders, either in my company or in other companies and news organizations around the country. In America, everyone should be able to be or do what they want to do. If they want to be the president of this country, they should be able to be the president of this country. And if they want to run a newsroom, it shouldn't matter. They should be able to bring their voice to the table. So today, as we remember and honor Dory, I would ask you all to consider that the best way to keep her memory and legacy alive is to keep training the next generation. Thank you.
Our next remembrance will be by Eric Newton of the Knight Foundation.
When I was helping Dory edit the collection of columns from her father, she began to call me her twin. For some reason, some people can't see the resemblance. But I'm sure you can, right? We were twins because we thought America's newsrooms should keep their promise to reflect the communities they serve. And we're twins because we thought that all storytellers should understand the social fault lines of gender, race, generations, geography, and class. And we were twins because we loved the Maynard family tradition of spinning out big ideas like taffy. The more serious, the better. And we both liked to scoop. So, I don't think she'd mind my mentioning that tomorrow morning, a press release from the American Society of Newspaper Editors will go out announcing the Dori J. Maynard Award for Diversity in Journalism. To be given every year for extraordinary storytelling that helps a community better understand itself. Dory and I talked a lot on the phone. I was on the East Coast, and she was on the West Coast. It takes me an hour to drive home, but I would end the day sitting in my driveway because Dory was still on the phone. In almost every call, there was a point upon which we disagreed. And at that moment, Dory would, with a kind of fierce calm, lay out these facts and change the conversation and often change my mind. So you could say that the mobile phone was like a media bridge between us, and from different points we moved forward to get a fuller view. Dory's dad called those kinds of bridges structures of integrity. And both Bob and Dory thought a good newspaper could be such a bridge. And structures of integrity, they said, would be flexible enough to withstand the moving fault lines and the social earthquakes that we see even now. I came to understand that not just a newsroom, but a classroom or a courtroom could be a structure of integrity, or an institute. And the Maynard Institute has transformed the thinking at newsrooms, big and small, with hiring, training, research, and its own journalism. The Institute has helped the nation's most diverse fellowship programs get that way. It helped people become leaders, and it helped leaders see the value in community voices. Dory would tell the story of how her father taught her to drive a stick shift. And Bob took her to the tallest hill in the neighborhood, got out of the car, and said, "Well, Deej, nothing to do but to do it." So she did it. And when the time came for Dory to drive the Maynard Institute into the 21st century, there was nothing to do but to do it. So she did it again. We credit Bob, and we should, with his insights into fault lines and structures of integrity. But his greatest journalistic invention, the structure that had the most integrity of all, was a person. Her name is Dory. Thank you.
We'd like to share another selection of Dory's work. So will Nolan McCaskill of Politico please come forward?
Good evening, everyone. I am Nolan McCaskill, a graduate of the Politico Journalism Institute, which was a joint program put on by Politico and the Maynard Institute, which also led to the beginning of my career as a reporter at Politico. And I'll be reading one of Dori Maynard's columns. According to the Times, on Father's Day 2008, President Obama told the congregation on the south side of Chicago that his was not a unique experience, that more than half of all black children are growing up in single-parent households. That's more than a horrific figure or a dry statistic. It's countless children at risk of being set adrift without the financial support and firm foundation of two loving parents. It's a gaping hole in the lives of every one of those children. All of us should work for a world in which this never happens. And to do that, just as we criticize what is wrong, we need to spend time celebrating what is right. You need look no further than the men we celebrate every Black History Month. Martin Luther King Jr., Medgar Evers, and Malcolm X were all heads of intact Black families. Even while we recognize their contributions to history, we should remember that they were also fathers. Those famous heads of intact Black families should be viewed as proxies for all the unsung fathers of color who share the chores and joys of being an active and present father. These are not the men of my wishful imagination. They are my friends, my colleagues, my neighbors, the editor of this newspaper, and soon my oldest brother will join their ranks. They are the men who stepped in and stood by my 13-year-old brother when our father died. Thank you, Jimmy Wood and Hal Logan, for helping to guide him safely into manhood. Committed fathers of color are everywhere throughout my life, and they are virtually nowhere in the media. Their invisibility does us all a disservice. By failing to recognize them, we paint a distorted picture of African American life. Equally importantly, we rob ourselves of important role models. If we want to change behavior, it might be helpful to point out some positive examples. As the legendary journalist Earl Caldwell tells his students at Hampton University, you shouldn't only dig for the ugly. You also need to hold up the beautiful. That is one of the best ways to point out all of life's possibilities. He's right. It's so much easier to aspire to that which we know is possible.
Moving on to our next remembrance, it'll be by Geneva Overholzer from the Democracy Fund.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm so honored and moved to be here among all of you at this remarkable gathering celebrating so astonishing a life. Like so many of you, I loved Dory, and I feel really privileged to be here. If I can get myself together, I'm going to read my remarks. I don't need to tell any of you in this room that if you are determined to get a bunch of journalists to really wrestle, life-changingly, with diversity issues, you are likely to be sorely disappointed. And this is even truer with a bunch of journalism academics who tend not only to have the cockiness of journalists, they have the pomposity of academics added in. So when I felt that the great opportunity before me as director of the USC Annenberg School of Journalism was to be among the most open, future-oriented, diverse, and inclusive J schools in the country, what did I do? I called on Dory. Dory was a longtime friend, and I knew that the sensitivity and complexity and wisdom of her Fault Lines work, not to mention her sense of humor and tenacity, would be my best bet. Dory had a gift, as all of us here know, for helping people open their eyes to the life-shaping forces of race and class and gender, generation and geography, those fault lines that were so key to the Maynard Institute's work. In 2 sterling sessions at USC, she did what Dory did every day of her life. She helped people take off their blindfolds to understand that each of us has our othernesses. She enabled us to open our minds and listen and to see the world more fully and accurately. When journalism professors can do that, obviously, a whole lot of future journalists stand to benefit. That was one moment in my relationship with Dory. But there were so many more as our lives crisscrossed over the years among Northern and Southern California, DC, and New York. Just as I had come to know her father, Bob, many years before, because boards at that time felt they needed one person of color and one woman. And with Bob and me, they got one of each. I came to know Dory on board after board and at journalism gathering after gathering. By then, they figured maybe even a couple of women would be good. We made a point of getting together for laughs and spiritual nourishment at meals in Chicago or New Orleans or wherever we happened to be. When I was in the Bay Area, we'd walk around Lake Merritt, and when she was in New York, she'd come to our apartment, of course, bringing her own tea and anything she was going to eat. We'd talk about what was most heavily on our minds, and she'd listen with real support to my white girl progressive feminist frustrations. She was, of course, a good feminist herself. But being around Dory was a call to expand yourself, as all of us know. She always called us as journalists to look squarely at the ways that we were failing our calling and failing our countrymen and causing great pain and injustice as a result. Here's something that Dory knew with all of her heart and soul. The fact that any single American could think that black men have even a faint shot at equal justice in this country. This is a tragic failure of journalism. We have allowed the prevailing blindness, we have even caused it through our negligence, our perpetuation of stereotypes, and our plain old ignoring of facts. We have allowed this to happen and to go on and on for so many years with so many lives lost. Dory, if she were here, would be holding us accountable. She held us to account. I can't read through my tears. For this and so many other injustices and journalistic failures, and she beckoned us gently but fiercely to do better. What a blessing was Dory's life, so well and wisely lived, and oh, how much she left us to live up to. Now, before I finish, I have to say one thing. I wrote a piece for the Neiman Bulletin. We were fellow Neimans, Dory and I wrote a piece about her in which I said some of these things, and at the end, I said what great legs she had, and how she always showed them off with her wonderful clothes. But the Neiman people made me take it out.
Unfortunately, Sean Dove will not be here to read his comments, but again, in honor of Dory's awesome legacy and his own awesome achievements, he was in New York today for the President's announcement of My Brother's Keeper Alliance and could not get away in time. So we will send him our happy congratulations.
Okay. So our next remembrance is from Mark Trehane, University of Alaska, Anchorage, and board chair of the Maynard Institute.
Thank you. Great to be here tonight in this wonderful tribute. I was reading Maynard history and came across this little tidbit. In 1999, Mark Trehane, a former president of the Native American Journal Association, became Institute board chair. And as the new century dawned, took over as CEO for 2 years. My quote was, quote, "The most important thing I did was to lay the groundwork for Dory's presidency." Absolutely not true. Dory was ready long before I ever arrived on the scene. She wasn't necessarily eager for the job, but she certainly was ready. She knew from the beginning she took the post that, and the board knew that she was the right person for the job, and we all had for some time. A year ago, Dory was able to come to Alaska to be the keynote speaker at the Alaska Press Club. And she told me how important it was to see it. It was one of the places she wanted to visit. And in her short time there, she just loved it. She loved the geography, the mountains, and the fact that Alyeska Resort had massage rooms. She was also intrigued by Alaska as a story. Alaska is one of those states that reflect Dory's vision of the future, the new American diversity. In fact, Alaska will be majority minority in just 2030, 15 years from now. How big a deal is that? The entire country won't reach that point until 2044. Just after she left Alaska, Dory's persistent cough started. So much so that she had me check all of the restaurants in Alyeska area to see if they had given her food that wasn't right. One day she called and told me about the actual diagnosis. And then a few weeks after that, we talked again, and she said, matter-of-factly, that it was terminal. She followed that with, "So what are you going to do?" and then laughed. She said it as a sentence, not as a question, because at the point she did not want to dwell on her mortality. There was just too much to do. Working with Dory over the years, since 1999, to set up board meetings was always an interesting challenge. I had to make certain that every board meeting was not held when Mercury was in retrograde. So I'd come up with a date, and she said, "That's not going to work." I checked. Mercury will not be in retrograde until May 19th, so we're good today. She also had her key oils placed around the perimeter of the meeting, which she assured me would do the things that it was supposed to do. So our board meeting today was in that vein, and this memorial, I think, is in good shape. Her work on fault lines, of course, started with her father, and as many of you know, and Dory was fond of telling, it all started because of psychic malpractice. A California future teller told her that her father would survive his illness, so she was certain that she would not have to finish this task, so she eagerly agreed to do it. But her father died, and Dory picked up the work and continued the mission. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? It's a question now for all of those who believe in Dory's work, her father's work, the Institute's work, because this country cannot be the kind of country it wants to be unless we all have access to the story being told in news pages, on television, and more digitally. Dory and I had many conversations about the digital media and its capacity to make the same mistakes as legacy media. A Harvard conference Dory was told she didn't need to worry about race and gender because it wouldn't occur in the digital space. It was going to be a neutral world. But while folks said this, the digital media, representing the most diverse generation in the history of this country, was and is on a path of hiring and of content that looks very much the same. Imagine, we should have been able to fix this problem before it locked in, and that remains a challenge. Dory's legacy, of course, includes the Institute. As been said many times this evening, she was working on Maynard projects, including fundraising, on the day of her death. It mattered that much to her. So I'll be blunt, because I know Dory would have been. Preserving the legacy of the Institute, as Dory used to say, at 30+ years and counting, remains a challenge. The Institute started in 1974, first at Columbia, and then at the University of California at Berkeley, then an editing program at the University of Arizona, and the Management Training Center at Northwestern. Along the way, often there were challenges. Dory's health and her death, of course, is one. But there's always been this broader constituency of people willing to step in and to make sure that the work happened, to make sure there was one more thing to do. So what are you going to do? Dory matched that sentence over and over with action, matter of fact. Her legacy fits into the contributions of those who are no longer with us from the MIJE family, including her father, Robert C. Maynard, Nancy Hicks Maynard, Roy Aarons, Charles Jackson, John Dotson, Walter Stovall, and the many who contributed their time and money to the Institute. So what are you going to do? Like Dory, picking up fault lines, we now need to pick up the work and continue on. So what are you going to do? I'm going to work harder, carrying out the task before us. Thank you.
And here to present yet another classic from Dory's archive will be Mia Navarro of the New York Times.
Good evening. I'm a proud member of the Institute's Summer Program for Minority Journalists class of 1979. The best class ever. Right, Kevin? Right, Evelyn? Anyone else? Oh my gosh. We are the best class ever because we've been terrified of disappointing our mentors. I always reminded Dory of that when I saw her at conferences, and she always laughed. We are family, and we'll continue to try to make Dory and Bob, Nancy, Roy, Eileen Shanahan, Frank Del Olmo, so many others who have left us proud. On November 6, 2007, Dory addressed the difference between social networking and the social bubble. This is what she wrote. Once again, the issue of social networks versus social bubbles has been on my mind since I attended the Online Newspaper Association. While I was there, several people either asked me directly or raised the issue of diversity in online social networks during panel discussions. I think what they were really talking about is how to burst their social bubble and actually create a social network. A network, particularly on the hyperlinked web, suggests to me a vast series of connections that naturally lead you away from your comfort zone and into the home of those you might never encounter in your everyday life. A social bubble, on the other hand, may still be a large place with multiple connections, but those connections never truly take you outside of your sphere. You may, in fact, meet people you don't know, but you won't meet people you don't know much about. In many ways, our online social bubbles are simply recreating our analog experience. So how do we break out of our sphere? Here were a couple of the problems posed and the advice given. Trying to recruit interns of color for web-based projects, contact the local chapters of the ethnic journalism organizations and ask them to put out the word on the listserv. Ask them to not only find students, but also help you identify local blogs written by students and adults of color. Once you are able to bring some interns of color onto your organization, listen to them. You may hear ideas that don't make sense to you right away. Probe. Those very well may be the ideas that help you break through to new audiences. Treat your interns well. Their experience will be your biggest selling point. Help them feel like valued contributors, and they will pass the word on to their social bubble. As the two merge, you will be on the verge of creating a true social network. Need to get some ethnic or racial group with which you have no ties to contribute to a citywide blog? First, look into the community and see if there are people who are already blogging. Go out in the community, not with the goal of finding people to immediately serve your goals. Go out with the goal of discovering the community's needs. Get to know people. Who are the natural leaders? Who likes to talk about the issues of the day? Find those people, develop a rapport, and let them see the value of working with you to get out the word on their community. There's a big difference between a social bubble and a social network, but it's not difficult to get from here to there once we truly recognize the value of moving outside of our sphere. Thank you.
We move on to our last group of remembrances. So we invite Kevin Morita of the Washington Post to come forward.
Good evening, everyone. You know, it's great to see so many people, and you hate to collect like this and after deaths. It's either deaths or weddings. But it's really great to see so many people who are so committed to diversity and making this industry better. I am honored to have known this extraordinary woman, Dori Maynard. I'm a graduate of the 1979 Summer Program for Minority Journalists, and it was one of the defining experiences of my life. Not just of my career, it helped shape my life, because the thing that it did, and Don alluded to, was certainly the best reporting program I think that has ever existed. It helped you to think, and you can teach people how to write and report, and there are lots of other skills to acquire, but the thinking part of this business is probably the most important part. It was an exhilarating summer of 10 memorable weeks. And it was then that I first met Dori Maynard. Now, how that happened? I was invited to dinner by Nancy, Dory's stepmom, and Bob Maynard, and I went to their home. And to tell you the truth, I was pretty nervous about it. I didn't really know why I was invited to dinner. I think because the guest of honor was a Washington Post editor, and that was my hometown paper, and maybe they thought they were making a connection. And I get there, and you know, Nancy offers me a drink. I had my drinking sophistication had not advanced at that point, but I saw people drinking scotch, so I said, well, I'll have scotch. And I'd say, Nancy, with a little 7-Up with it. And she looked at me, you know, like steel eyes, and said, you know, Kevin Merida, you're not going to ruin my good scotch with 7-Up, and refused to serve me scotch. So that didn't start out so well, but the conversations were going on, and in walks Dory, and she's home from college, and introductions are made, and as the conversation goes on, I begin to kind of use some of my reporting instincts I was honing at the summer program to maybe think, well, maybe they're trying to do some matchmaking here, you know. I kind of figured that out, and you know, began to think. Now, Dory at that time was confident and self-assured, as she was much later, had not the slightest bit interest in me. I don't think she said very many words to me, which was probably wise. She was showing wisdom then. And so that was just a happenstance meeting, and nothing became of the matchmaking. But it was the first time we had a connection, and many years later, we did become friends and associates and colleagues, and we did work together. And I admired her so much, you know, particularly once I became a senior editor at the Washington Post, and I was thinking about a lot of things I wasn't thinking about when I was a writer. First as national editor and then as managing editor. She was always asking, how can the Maynard Institute push the envelope? How can we influence the industry? What is the latest cutting edge technology? She always wanted to know what was going on inside. What were we experimenting with? She wanted to get out in front of it and try to influence and help the Maynard help the Maynard Institute influence how the industry was moving in this digital era. And every time I was ever with her at coffee, at lunch, or just in a room, I always thought, here is the wisest, most insightful person in this room. And she inspired me, because sometimes when you're a manager and some of the things that happen in our industry, you know, you can get down, but she inspired me to be better. You know, to honor her legacy, I think the thing that we can do is to not give up and to be more determined. Because she understood that all lives matter, that we needed to be both diverse within our ranks. I sometimes say that it's great to be in a newsroom. If you want to have a party, having a bunch of friends, everybody being alike, that's great if you want a party, but it's not great for journalism. You got to court difference. And she understood that. There was an early campaign by the Maynard Institute when they were doing public service campaigns about diversity. I'll never forget it because it stuck in my mind. I clipped it, and it was an ad, public service ad, and it was a black man kind of in a backdrop portrait shot, and he was smearing white cream on his face. And the tagline was, "This won't make him a better journalist." And I later got somebody to sketch that, and for many years in the early part of my career, I framed that, had that on my wall to remind me of how important it was that there was nothing about gender, skin color that's going to make you a great journalist. It's going to take all of us to make this industry better. And so I hope that we leave here, not treat it like it's a fad. She understood, that it's popular this decade, but not popular the next decade, like it's cupcakes. It's not. It should be core and central to who we are, because that's how we live. That's in our schools and our communities. We're a collection of many different people. We have the most responsibility of anybody to lead that way in our journalism ministry. So thank you very much.
And our final remembrance tonight will be from Earl Caldwell of Hampton University.
Pretty high step for an old guy. This has been a long and an emotional day. Early this afternoon, with Liz, Dory's mom, her sister, her brother David Maynard, my godson, her brother Alex Caldwell Maynard. We went to Rock Creek Park to lay Dory to rest with her husband Charles in a gravesite next to Bob Maynard, her father, and Nancy Maynard, his wife, her stepmother. I don't want to be, I hope you'll forgive me for being emotional. I knew Dory. We were together for 50 years. It wasn't just Dory and myself. We were a family. We were together. Her father was the first person I ever met, same color as me, wanting to do the same kind of work. Bob told me, he said, about his daughter, he said, "You're gonna love Dory." He had that right. Doris told me about going down to the LBJ Ranch in Texas with her father, who was covering the White House for his newspaper, the Washington Post. And I said, "Dory, well, how did you, what did you do? What were you doing?" I mean, she said, I was with the Washington, I was with the National Press Corps. It was the White House Press Corps. We flew down. We went to the ranch. For the first part of my life with Dory, I thought I knew everything. Second part, before she sent me off to Hampton University, and she did, she also sent the oral histories of 50 of the most distinguished black journalists that we've produced in this country. she had so much foresight. When she was 10 years old in 1968, when the Kerner Report, which is really was the presidential report asking this distinguished group of Americans to look into the causes of these uprisings. They called them the civil disorders. In the media, they're mostly characterized as riots. In these communities, people were calling them rebellions. But it's all of this difference in the way people see these things, that when Kerner came back with this report, what are the causes? What is causing these rebellions? Why is it that these things have come at Americans and they're not prepared, that they know nothing about it? They don't understand it. And Kerner's damning indictment was that we depend upon the institution of the news media. And Kerner said that had the media wanted to inform the public, which is what it takes on as its great responsibility, it couldn't have done it. Because the finding in 1968 was that the newsrooms were virtually all white and all male. Dory read the whole report. Her father, in his writing for the newspaper and other publications, was the defining voice for what this report meant and how important it was for America that we do something about this America, which is being portrayed through the eyes, and only through the eyes of white men. This was in Dory's ear when she was 10. She did a lot of other things. I tell you, in those 50 years, Dory and I, we had some times. I mean, good times. There were times when people would say, ask Dory, did you see Earl? Dory would say, Earl who? And I'd know it was some bad times. But we were family. And I'm emotional now because my heart is filled to overflowing with the most wonderful, spectacularly wonderful, precious memories. I listen to all these things that's been said about Dory tonight, and they got Dory down. I wish I could tell you some of my Dory stories, but I'm between speaking now and the reception. I'm wise enough to know, keep it short. But I want to say this. In the last part of her life, when she was asked to lead the Maynard Institute, actually before, when her and Steve Montiel were there, they invited me out to be writer in residence there for a while. I had a wonderful time. This is when we got the idea to start the oral histories. This is the kind of thinking, the forward thinking that they had. They wanted, and Roy Aarons was the editor in this project and said, this new media that was rising, how do you write for that media? Do you just take the story and cut that's in the newspaper and paste it in? It's the same way, or do you do it a certain way? Their resources were precious, but they took what they had to get us, to allow us to do this. New York Times bought this series that we started there and ran it in syndication. Dory saw so many things. It wasn't just about Earl Caldwell going to Hampton, although she did get that woman who was the president of Scripps Howard Foundation. They want me to come down there and do something. Dory said, well, I will tell you, here's how that has to go down. The woman for the head of the Scripture Foundation there told me, she said, I don't like Dory, but I'm going to do it. Because, as it was said before, Dory was tough. She knew how to be tough. But she was committed to the idea of doing something about the lack of diversity in these newsrooms. Early on, when this idea first came up with the Institute, it wasn't that difficult. The big money in the industry was going to these print publications, these old standard blue chippers that we depended on. They had the money. They provided the wherewithal to launch the Maynard Institute, to set out, to create a platform where we would have a full discussion of these issues. And they were even trying to get closer to making commitments to setting a specific time, a date, and say, we're going to do this by X year. But then the wind began to blow the other way. This new media came like from out of nowhere, really, in the sky, pulled it down, here it is. And the next thing you know, these blue chip things that the big publishing companies depended on, the companies that had professional reporters. It costs a lot of money to have these reporters. It takes a lot of money to have these big staffs, to do all of these things that we know are precious. But suddenly that money was going somewhere else. These foundations that supported the Maynard Institute, they didn't have the money. But Dory, she wouldn't give up. Dory would go everywhere to do whatever she could do. People say Dory was tireless. You're not tireless. You get tired. She's a human being. And you get weary. And you don't take care of yourself as you ought to. You get up in the morning and you don't have the energy. You don't want to do it. No, I don't want to say you don't want to do it. Your body doesn't want to do it. But in our lives, we have these special people that come at these special moments. And they are committed. And they don't feel, they are tired, but they take 2 aspirins and they get up and they do what they have to do. Dory was telling me about how when she was flying all the time, and how the airlines, when as soon as she would make her reservation, automatically move her up to first class. She's a big customer. But that was when it was going good. Later in her life, when she needed that. No, there is no upgrade. We're going to try to work you into one of those seats jammed in the back. And when you're traveling all the time, and when you're not feeling well, and the road gets rough, all of this, it makes you vulnerable. It makes you vulnerable. In my mind, Dori Maynard is a heroic figure. She had what the Attorney General of the United States, the outgoing Attorney General Eric Holder, said about America. He said America doesn't have the courage to stand up to these issues of race. Dori Maynard had the courage. She put everything that she had in her life in it. You know why I know? Because so many of you are here in this room tonight, and you're not here by accident, and I know you didn't come, although I did see a truck unloading champagne down there. You came because you know the price that she was willing to pay, and you appreciate the work, and you also understand that this nation can never be, as Bob Maynard said, what we need it to be. if we're going to try to continue on that road, to have the whites only or token others, it cannot be that way. Dory put her life, but I believe, and I believe Martin Luther King put it this way, that he said to give a life in a movement, in an effort that is designed to save the soul of a nation. There's nothing that's more redemptive than that. Dori Maynard passed that test. For me personally, I'm still talking to Dory. I'm gonna be talking to her for a long time. I can hear her. I can hear her saying to me, I'm listening. But Dory let me do all the talking. I love her so much, her family, and I love all of you who are here tonight who are supporters. Thank you very much.
We'd like to welcome Marty Austin Lamar with a musical send-off for Dori Maynard.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Yes, when this flesh and heart shall fail, and mortal life shall cease, I shall is gone. A life of joy and peace. Praise God, 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 praise God. Amen. Amen. Amen.
That was beautiful. Let's give him another round of applause. We want to thank our speakers for their lovely stories, stories of warmth and love. We want you to join us in recognizing our speakers, but more importantly, we want you to join us in recognizing Dory's family. So please join us in giving them a nice round. We have a reception, but before we get to the reception, we just want to recognize organizations that supported Dory in having this memorial. And we want to start by recognizing the Freedom Forum and the Newseum for providing the space this evening. So let's give them a nice round of applause.
We'd also like to recognize our generous contributors to the reception, the Associated Press, and specifically its Washington Bureau, Gannett, the McClatchy Company, National Public Radio, the Newspaper Association of America, the Online News Association, and Politico. We'd like to thank ASNE for their generous donation of flowers.
We'd also like to recognize again the planning committee that worked so hard to make this event as beautiful as it is. And that is Jean Fox Austin, Evelyn Sue, Dorothy Butler Gilliam, Richard Prince, and Sonia Ross. Let's give them another round of applause. If you feel like making a donation to the memorial, the family invites donations to the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education. And so we encourage you, if you would like to make a donation, to please do so. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't recognize the wonderful gift from the Knight Foundation. Let's give a hand for that legacy award. That concludes our service for this evening. We invite you to join us in the adjoining room for the reception. Thank you so much for being with us.